hallelujah, hallelujah. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Please be seated. In St. Paul's letter to the Romans this morning, we hear him talk about being a slave of righteousness, or a slave of the world and its evil. And he says, when you are not concerned about righteousness or doing righteous things in your life, and you did as you pleased, and you lived your own life as you saw fit, then you are a slave to uncleanness, a slave to sin. And even though you spent God knows how long in your life searching out for this pleasures of life and the things that made you happy and the things that really made you feel like you were getting somewhere or getting ahead or somehow making the best of your life, you were unfulfilled. Your self-centeredness did not fulfill you. But you were a slave to this kind of life. And then, of course, when Christ comes into your life and the righteousness of God is there, we as Christians give up the slavery of sin, and instead we voluntarily accept the slavery of righteousness. For you see, we are slaves to one or the other. And we voluntarily accept one or the other. In the scriptures we read not long ago, we read that you cannot serve two masters, for you will hate one and love the other, or love the one and hate the other. You cannot serve God and mammon both. In other words, you cannot serve good and evil both at the same time. Either love good or you love evil. And in our lives, this slavery that we take upon ourselves is either slavery for the good or slavery for ourselves and our self-centeredness and evil. The saints saw this, and this is how the saints lived. They were slaves to righteousness. Whatever was good, whatever was pure, whatever was wholesome, whatever was the right thing to do, the saints did that. We, not yet being saints, in the fullness of the word saint, we struggle in our lives between good and evil, between doing good and doing evil. And even though we strive to do that which is righteous, we often fail. And it's because of our own passions overcoming us. It's because of our self-centeredness. And we make excuses for ourselves. But this is not the path that we should follow. We should always seek to do that which is righteous and to do that which is good. We should always seek to do that which is the right thing to do. For if we do that, we will see salvation. We will see the freedom that comes from being a slave to righteousness. When you are a slave to sin, you have a freedom, a license to do whatever you want. But when you are a slave to righteousness, you have it sent down to you from the commandments of Christ, the commandments of God, how to live, how to treat your neighbor, and how to become a slave of righteousness, and therefore achieve the freedom of God and the true freedom which Paul talks about in his letter to the Romans. And we couple that idea of being a slave to righteousness and a slave to doing good with the gospel reading this morning about the centurion. And we can learn a lot from this man. Christ was in Capernaum when the centurion came up to him. Now, being a centurion, he was a military man, and he had 100 soldiers under him. And he came to Christ and he said, "My servant is lying at home paralyzed, dreadfully tormented." And in the scriptures, it probably is more appropriate to translate the word servant as slave. My slave is at home, paralyzed, dreadfully tormented. And the centurion was very concerned about him. He loved the slave, and he wanted to see the slave restored to good health. And Jesus said to him, "I will come and heal him." But what did the centurion say to him? He said, "Lord, I am not worthy that you should come under my roof, but only speak a word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man under authority, having soldiers under me. And I say to this one, 'Go,' and he goes, and to another, 'Come,' and he comes, and to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." You see, the centurion understood that his slave was there to keep his commandments, and he was there to keep the commandments of the person who was over him in the military. And so the centurion understood how the slave and the master relationship worked. And when you kept the commandments of your master, then you did not have problems. Your life was orderly, and to a great deal you had freedom, as long as you kept the commandments of your master. And Jesus, when he heard it, he marveled and said to those who followed him, "Assuredly, I say to you, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel." Christ verified and confirmed the faith of the centurion, because he knew that the centurion knew that all Christ had to do was command that the disease go away and his servant would be healed. He knew that the centurion was willing to follow his commandments. He knew that the centurion wanted righteousness rather than self-centeredness. And then he said to the centurion, "Go your way, as you have believed, so let it be done for you." And his servant was healed that same hour. We as Christians have the same choice that the centurion had, to obey. And in our obedience to God and his commandments, we will be slaves to righteousness. And as we become slaves to righteousness, then we will find true freedom. So we ask ourselves, well then, do I have to fast? If you want to be a slave to righteousness, yes. Do I have to come to church? If you want to be a slave to righteousness, yes. Whatever you do, it must be good. Shy away from evil. Have no part of it. Always do the right thing. Always do that which you know in your heart is the right thing to do. So we ask ourselves, in our daily life, what does that mean? When we are a slave to righteousness, when we go about and gossip about people, say bad things about people, we know in our heart it's not the right thing to do. And like I said earlier, sometimes our passion overcomes us. But we know it's not the right thing to do. And so we should stop. Do that which is good. And whatever we do it with love. Love one another. This is so important. We need to become slaves to righteousness and not to evil. And it is a lifelong journey. And it is not easy. But God will help us, and God is there to help us. If we simply seek out His guidance, His love, follow His commandments, and consciously think and try to do that which is righteous, and always keep in our heart what is the right thing to do. If we will simply ponder those things, God will give us the strength, and God will help us. And may He help us all on that path to righteousness.